The rain fell in a relentless, melancholic curtain over Palermo, Sicily, casting a somber pallor upon the ancient stones of the Chiesa di San Domenico. Inside, despite the grandeur of the historic cathedral, a heavy, suffocating atmosphere prevailed, thick with unspoken grief and simmering tension. This was no ordinary funeral. Front and center, beneath the soaring arches and intricate frescoes, lay a coffin, an ornate sarcophagus befitting a king, or perhaps a legend. It held the supposed remains of Don Vincenzo the Viper Rossi, a name whispered with a mixture of fear, respect, and grudging admiration throughout the underworld and beyond. He was a mafia boss of the old guard, a man whose influence stretched like an unseen web across the island and far beyond its shores. The church was a tableau of power and sorrow. Every pew was occupied, every aisle lined with figures of significance. Powerful men, their faces etched with a lifetime of hard decisions, sat alongside their impeccably dressed wives, their expressions carefully neutral. Old associates, their eyes glinting with a lifetime of shared secrets and unspoken allegiances, nodded solemnly. Don Rossi's immediate family, veiled in black, occupied the front rows, their grief a palpable, heavy cloak. Even a few nervous-looking politicians, their presence a testament to the Don's far-reaching grasp, huddled in discreet corners, their forced solemnity barely concealing their unease. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and beeswax, punctuated by hushed murmurs and the occasional stifled sob. Everyone was dressed in black, a uniform of mourning that unified the disparate assembly, their faces grim, their posture rigid with a mix of respect and an underlying current of apprehension. As the eulogy began, delivered by a priest whose voice trembled slightly under the weight of the occasion, a sudden, jarring disturbance shattered the carefully constructed solemnity. The heavy main doors of the Chiesa di San Domenico burst open with an unexpected, echoing bang, momentarily silencing the priest and drawing every eye to the entrance. Framed against the gray light of the rainy afternoon stood a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, her figure slender and almost fragile against the imposing backdrop. She was dressed simply in clothes that starkly contrasted with the expensive, tailored attire of the mourners, a plain, dark dress, practical and unadorned. This was Maria, the daughter of Isabella, Don Rossi's longtime housekeeper, a woman who had served the Rossi family for decades with quiet dedication. Maria's face was streaked with fresh tears, blurring the fierce determination that burned in her eyes. Her hair, damp from the rain, clung to her forehead, adding to her disheveled appearance. Without a moment's hesitation, she pushed past the first few startled mourners, her gaze fixed on the coffin, her path unwavering. A ripple of whispers spread through the congregation, growing. Louder with each step she took down the aisle. Who was this girl? What was she doing? Her abrupt entrance, her plain attire, her obvious distress, it was all profoundly out of place. An unscripted disruption in a meticulously choreographed ceremony. Guards, stern-faced men posted at the church's entrance, moved to intercept her, but she moved with a desperate urgency that defied their slow, deliberate steps. She was an unstoppable force, driven by something far more powerful than social decorum or fear of reprisal. Maria reached the coffin, her breathing ragged, and stood before it, her back to the stunned congregation. Then, with a sudden decisive movement, she turned, her eyes sweeping across the sea of bewildered faces. Her voice, though trembling with emotion, rang clear through the hushed church, cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. "He's not dead!" she cried out, her voice cracking slightly but undeniably resolute. "Don Rossi is not dead!" A collective gasp echoed through the sacred space, a wave of shock and disbelief washing over the assembled mourners. People exchanged bewildered glances, confusion warring with anger on their faces. Some shifted uncomfortably, others openly scowled at the audacity of the girl. Don Rossi's trusted consigliere, Marco Falconi, a man whose presence was as imposing as his reputation, stepped forward from the front row. His face, usually a mask of stoic control, showed a flicker of exasperation. "Maria, child," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, an attempt to infuse calm into the escalating chaos. "Show respect. This is not the place." But Maria shook her head vehemently, her gaze unwavering, her trembling finger pointing directly at the closed coffin. "You're all being fooled," she declared, her voice finding newfound strength. My mother told me he's alive." The fragile order of the funeral shattered completely. The church descended into a cacophony of murmurs and outright exclamations. The guards, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, moved swiftly, converging on Maria, their intent clear: to restrain her, to remove her from the sacred space. Don Rossi's eldest son, Antonio, a man known for his fiery temper and ambition, rose from his seat, his face contorted with fury. Yet, amidst the anger, a fleeting flicker of something else crossed his features, a momentary uncertainty, a shadow of doubt. As the guards seized Maria, her small frame struggling against their grip, she continued to shout, her voice raw with conviction. "He's alive! He's alive!" The crowd was in an uproar, a swirling vortex of confusion and outrage, wondering what impossible, unbelievable thing had just unfolded before their very eyes. The funeral, intended as a solemn farewell, had become a scene of utter pandemonium, a shocking interruption that would forever alter the course of events. The chaos Maria unleashed at the funeral, her desperate, defiant cries echoing through the hallowed halls, was a direct consequence of her mother Isabella's quiet, observant life. Isabella had arrived in Palermo as a young woman, barely out of her teens, a timid girl from a poor, sun-baked village nestled in the mountains outside the city. The bustling, sophisticated world of Palermo was a stark contrast to the simple life she had known, but necessity and the promise of work had drawn her to the city. She found employment in the grand, imposing estate of Don Vincenzo Rossi, starting as a humble maid, her duties initially confined to scrubbing floors and polishing silverware. But Isabella was more than just a maid. She possessed an innate meticulousness, an unwavering dedication, and a quiet intelligence that did not go unnoticed. Over the years, she ascended through the ranks, transitioning from a maid to the esteemed position of the family's trusted housekeeper. She became an indispensable fixture in the Rossi household, a silent observer who saw everything, heard everything, yet spoke nothing. Her loyalty was absolute, not out of blind devotion, but out of a pragmatic understanding of her place and the need to protect her own. She practically raised Don Rossi's children, Antonio and Sofia, alongside her own daughter, Maria, pouring into them the same silent care and watchful attention she gave to her own flesh and blood, though always maintaining a respectful distance, an invisible boundary that marked her position. Isabella's life on the estate was one of quiet, dedicated service. Her days were a rhythm of routine, the clatter of breakfast dishes, the rustle of linens, the hushed conversations in the kitchen, the methodical cleaning of rooms that held secrets she never acknowledged. She moved through the grand halls like a shadow. Her presence felt more than seen. She had a small apartment on the estate, a modest sanctuary away from the opulence, a place she cherished for its independence. It was here, within those humble walls, that she nurtured her daughter, instilling in Maria the values of hard work, honesty, and above all, discretion. "We see, we hear, we say nothing," she would often tell Maria, a mantra born of survival in a world where loose lips could lead to dire consequences. Isabella valued her independence, but she valued her daughter's future even more, dreaming of a life for Maria that transcended the boundaries of the Rossi estate. Don Vincenzo Rossi himself was a formidable figure, a man whose very name commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He was powerful, cunning, and undeniably ruthless when the situation demanded it. Yet, he also possessed a charismatic quality, an old-world charm that, when he chose to wield it, could inspire fierce loyalty from those within his inner circle. He was known for his strategic mind, a chess master who always seemed to be several moves ahead of his adversaries, his plans intricate and often inscrutable. He had built an empire, not just through brute force, but through a meticulous understanding of human nature and a network of favors and obligations that stretched far and wide. He had many enemies, a testament to his power, but also countless individuals who owed him their allegiance, their lives, or their fortunes. Isabella's interactions with him were always formal, professional, yet there was an underlying, unspoken understanding between them. He trusted her more than most, a silent acknowledgement of her unwavering presence and her uncanny ability to anticipate his needs without a word. He knew she possessed a unique perspective, privy to the intimate details of his life without ever betraying a confidence. Maria grew up on the periphery of this opulent, often dangerous world, a child observing from the wings. She played with Antonio and Sofia, Don Rossi's children during their younger years, their shared childhood games a brief, innocent bridge between their disparate statuses. Yet, even then, Maria was acutely aware of her place, the invisible lines that separated her from the Rossi heirs. Her mother's constant reminders, "We see, we hear, we say nothing," were etched into her young mind. Maria was a bright child, inherently observant, her curious eyes noticing details that often escaped others. She had a keen mind, a thirst for knowledge that Isabella, despite her limited means, fiercely encouraged. As Maria blossomed into a young woman, she consciously distanced herself from the gilded cage of the Rossi family's world. Her mother, ever pragmatic, encouraged her to seek a different path, a life free from the shadows of the Mafia. Maria excelled academically, eventually enrolling in university to study law, a world away from the clandestine dealings and veiled threats that characterized the Rossi empire. She rarely visited the sprawling estate, immersing herself instead in her studies, in libraries, and in the pursuit of knowledge. Yet Isabella, in her subtle, understated way, kept her updated on the goings-on, a quiet stream of information that painted a picture of Don Rossi's declining health, his increasing paranoia, and a mysterious illness that seemed to slowly consume him. Isabella's quiet worry about Don Rossi's health, conveyed in hushed tones over the phone or during rare visits, was the first tremor of the earthquake that would eventually shake the foundations of their lives. Maria listened, absorbing her mother's concerns, never imagining the profound impact these seemingly mundane details would soon have on her own destiny. For the past year, Don Rossi had been visibly weakening, a once formidable presence now a shadow of his former self. His robust frame had thinned considerably, his skin taking on an unhealthy pallor that even the Sicilian sun couldn't warm. He moved with a slow, deliberate gait, his once piercing eyes often clouded with confusion, a stark contrast to the sharp, calculating gaze that had defined him for decades. The family doctor, Dr. Giovanni, a man whose medical expertise was as widely recognized as his discretion, became an increasingly frequent visitor to the estate, his hushed consultations with Antonio, Don Rossi's son, growing more prolonged and secretive. Isabella, as Don Rossi's primary caretaker, found herself privy to an intimate, unsettling view of his decline. It was her duty to administer his complex regimen of medicines, to assist him with his daily routines, and to ensure his comfort. She moved through these tasks with her usual quiet efficiency, her hands gentle, her demeanor unwavering. Yet, beneath her composed exterior, a subtle disquiet began to stir. She noticed inconsistencies, small details that, when pieced together, painted a troubling picture. Don Rossi would have moments of surprising clarity, his mind sharp, his wit intact, only to descend into sudden, severe decline, his memory failing, his body trembling. The pattern felt unnatural, too abrupt to be mere old age or illness. As Don Rossi's health visibly declined, a subtle but undeniable power vacuum began to form within the intricate web of the Rossi family and its sprawling organization. Antonio, Don Rossi's eldest son, a man known for his ambition and sometimes volatile temper, began to assert more control, his presence at meetings more pronounced, his voice carrying more weight. He moved with a new swagger, a premature assumption of authority that did not go unnoticed by Isabella. Marco Falcone, the quiet, stoic consigliere, maintained his impassive demeanor, his sharp eyes missing nothing, observing the shifting dynamics with a detached intensity. Other lieutenants, sensing the change in the air, began to position themselves, their loyalties subtly tested, their ambitions barely concealed beneath a veneer of respect. Whispers like dry leaves skittering across cobblestones began to circulate within the organization. Rumors of a rival family, the Morettis, attempting to exploit Don Rossi's perceived weakness, to chip away at the Rossi empire, to challenge its long-held dominance. Isabella, with her sharp, observant mind and her unique vantage point, began to notice things that troubled her. Deeply, Don Rossi's medicines, meticulously laid out by Dr. Giovanni, seemed to change frequently, the dosages fluctuating, new vials appearing with little explanation. She would sometimes overhear hushed, urgent conversations between Dr. Giovanni and Antonio in the study, their voices low, their expressions guarded. their words often punctuated by the doctor's nervous cough. These clandestine discussions always seemed to precede one of Don Rossi's more severe periods of decline. One evening, while cleaning Don Rossi's study, a room she had entered countless times before, her hand brushed against a loose panel behind a bookshelf. Curiosity, a rare indulgence for Isabella, prompted her to investigate. To her surprise, she discovered a hidden compartment cleverly concealed containing old documents and, most notably, a small, worn, leather-bound diary. She didn't read it then, but the discovery lodged itself in her mind, a silent alarm bell. A chilling suspicion began to take root in Isabella's heart. Foul play. The thought was terrifying, yet increasingly undeniable. The inconsistencies, the hushed conversations, the mysterious diary, they coalesced into a disturbing narrative. She suspected something was terribly wrong, but the exact nature of it remained elusive, and the fear of speaking, of even hinting at her suspicions, was paralyzing. She knew the consequences of challenging the powerful, of unearthing secrets within such a dangerous world. Her silence had always been her shield, her protection. Then came the death. Don Rossi's passing was announced suddenly, jarringly, by Dr. Giovanni and Antonio. It was swift, almost too swift, following one of his most severe periods of decline. Isabella was devastated, a deep sadness settling over her for the man she had served faithfully for so long, but her grief was intertwined with a profound, gnawing suspicion. The timing felt unnervingly convenient, too perfectly aligned with the burgeoning power struggle she had witnessed. In the haze of her sorrow and unease, a specific, cryptic message Don Rossi had whispered to her during one of his rare, lucid moments echoed in her mind. His voice, frail but clear, had cut through the fog of his illness, his eyes momentarily regaining their old intensity. "Isabella," he had murmured, his gaze holding hers, "trust no one. The viper will shed his skin." The words had seemed nonsensical at the time, the ramblings of a sick man, but now they took on a chilling, prophetic significance. The viper will shed his skin. Could it mean he wasn't truly gone? Overwhelmed by her fears, and with the weight of that cryptic message pressing down on her, Isabella finally confided in Maria. Her daughter, away at university, was her only confidant, the only one she truly trusted. She called Maria, her voice trembling with an urgency that Maria had rarely heard. "Maria, something is very wrong," she pleaded, her words a desperate whisper. "He's not really gone. I feel it. You must come home." The fear in her mother's voice, the sheer desperation that bled through the phone line, was enough to send a jolt of alarm through Maria, compelling her to leave her studies and rush back to Palermo, to the heart of the very world she had tried so hard to escape. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of the Rossi Empire. Maria rushed back to Palermo, the urgency in her mother's voice echoing in her ears throughout the long journey. The familiar landscape of Sicily, usually a comforting sight, now seemed imbued with a sinister undertone, every shadow a potential threat. She found Isabella agitated, a nervous energy thrumming beneath her usually calm demeanor. Her mother was hesitant to speak openly, her eyes darting nervously towards the windows, as if expecting unseen ears to be listening. The fear, thick and palpable, hung heavy in the air between them, a silent testament to the dangerous world they inhabited. Isabella, usually so composed, was clearly terrified, not just for herself, but for Maria's safety, knowing the perilous path they were about to tread. But Maria, fueled by a fierce love for her mother and a growing sense of injustice, pressed her. She reminded Isabella of Don Rossi's unwavering trust in her, a trust that transcended their stations. She appealed to her mother's innate sense of justice, a quiet but firm moral compass that had always guided Isabella's actions. "Mama, you always taught me to stand up for what's right," Maria urged, her voice low but firm. "If something is wrong, we have to uncover it, no matter how frightening." Slowly, painstakingly, Isabella began to reveal her observations, her words coming in hushed, fragmented sentences at first, then gaining a more coherent flow as Maria listened intently, piecing together the unsettling narrative. Isabella recounted the bewildering changes in Don Rossi's medication, the frequent alterations to his prescriptions, the new vials that appeared with little explanation. She described the hushed, secretive conversations between Dr. Giovanni and Antonio, their faces grim, their voices barely audible, always preceding Don Rossi's sudden, debilitating declines. And then She spoke of Don Rossi's final, cryptic words, the chilling phrase that had haunted her since his death. "Isabella, trust no one. The viper will shed his skin." As Isabella spoke, her eyes welled with tears, not just of sadness, but of a profound sense of betrayal and a desperate hope that Maria could make sense of it all. Then, with a trembling hand, Isabella produced the small, worn, leather-bound diary she had found in the hidden compartment in Don Rossi's study. It felt ancient in Maria's hands, its pages brittle with age, its cover soft from countless touches. This, Isabella explained, was the key, the one thing that had solidified her suspicions. Together, Maria and Isabella painstakingly went through Don Rossi's diary. It was a tedious, meticulous process, as the entries were not straightforward. Don Rossi, a man of secrets, had written in a complex code, a mixture of personal shorthand, veiled metaphors, and seemingly random numbers that Maria, with her sharp, analytical mind, slowly began to decipher. The diary contained names, dates, and locations, but also a deeper, more chilling narrative. As they painstakingly translated the coded messages, a shocking truth began to emerge. Don Rossi had known. He had known he was being poisoned. The diary entries, growing increasingly detailed over the past year, laid bare his terrifying realization. He had been poisoned slowly, meticulously, by someone close to him, someone he had trusted implicitly. The entries revealed his growing paranoia, his desperate attempts to identify the betrayer, and his cunning plan to fake his own death. He had been working with a trusted secret contact not mentioned by name but referred to by a specific code to orchestrate his disappearance and, crucially, to expose the traitors who sought to usurp his power. The diary detailed his symptoms, the specific drug being administered, and his countermeasures. It was a testament to his strategic genius and his unwavering will to survive. Most importantly, the diary contained a crucial piece of information, a specific signal or trigger for his return, intricately linked to his funeral. It was a contingency plan designed to be activated only if his initial attempt to expose the conspirators failed, or if his carefully laid plans went awry. This signal, the diary implied, would be an act of defiance, a public disruption that would force the hand of his enemies and alert his trusted contact that his plan was compromised. As Maria absorbed the full weight of the diary's revelations, a chilling realization washed over her. The funeral, which was scheduled to take place the very next day, was not just a somber farewell, it was the key to everything. It was Don Rossi's final, desperate gamble, and Maria understood that she and her mother were now inextricably caught in its intricate web. The urgency of the situation became terrifyingly clear. They had to act, and quickly. But who could they trust in this treacherous world? The police, Maria knew from her legal studies, were often compromised, their loyalties bought or coerced. To go to them would be to sign their own death warrants. They were alone. Maria and Isabella felt the walls closing in around them, the air growing thick with danger. They were now privy to a secret that could easily get them killed. Their every move felt watched, every whisper a potential risk. They were in grave danger, trapped between a dead man's vengeful plan and the ruthless ambition of his betrayers. As the morning of the funeral dawned, a heavy, oppressive gray, Maria made a decision. It was a desperate, terrifying choice, born out of necessity and a fierce determination to protect her mother and honor Don Rossi's trust. She had no choice but to interrupt the funeral. It was the only way, the sole path left open to them. It was the signal, the trigger Don Rossi had so carefully orchestrated. It was the only way to activate his plan, to expose the truth, and to save her mother, and perhaps even herself, from the deadly machinations of the Rossi family's inner circle. With a deep breath, Maria prepared to step into the lion's den, knowing full well that her actions could either lead to salvation or to their swift, brutal end. Maria burst through the grand doors of the Chiesa di San Domenico, the heavy oak groaning in protest against her desperate force. The solemn hush of the funeral, thick with false grief and unspoken tensions, shattered instantly. All eyes, hundreds of them, swiveled towards her, their expressions a mixture of shock, annoyance, and outright fury. She saw the glares, felt the weight of their judgment, but none of it mattered. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and adrenaline, yet a fierce, unyielding resolve propelled her forward. She pushed past startled mourners, their whispers rising like a venomous hiss, her gaze locked on the elaborate coffin at the altar, the centerpiece of this elaborate lie. Every step was a battle against the rising tide of panic, every breath a prayer for courage. She reached the coffin, her hands trembling as she braced herself, then spun to face the stunned congregation. Her voice, though raw with emotion, cut through the sudden, horrified silence. "He's not dead!" she cried out, the words echoing through the cavernous church, charged with a desperate, undeniable truth. "Don Rossi is not dead!" A collective gasp rippled through the packed pews, followed by a torrent of confused murmurs. Heads turned, eyes widened, some faces contorted in anger, others in bewildered disbelief. This was it, the signal, the trigger, the point of no return. Before she could utter another word, strong hands seized her arms. Guards, their faces grim and unyielding, moved swiftly, efficiently to restrain her. They were well trained, practiced in handling disruptions, but this was different. This wasn't just a grieving relative losing control. This was an accusation. Don Rossi's eldest son, Antonio, his face a mask of furious indignation, stormed towards her, his jaw clenched, his eyes blazing. "What is the meaning of this, Maria?" he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl that barely concealed his rage. "Are you insane? Show some respect!" He tried to pull her away, his grip bruising. Maria struggled against the guards, her voice rising in a desperate plea. "You're all being fooled. My mother told me. He's alive!" But her words were drowned out by the rising crescendo of outrage from the mourners. Antonio's face was a mottled red, humiliation warring with anger. He gestured furiously to the guards to remove her immediately. Just as they began to drag her towards a side door, a figure stepped forward, his presence commanding, instantly quieting the immediate uproar. It was Marco Falconi, Don Rossi's trusted consigliere. His face, usually a stoic mask, remained impassive, but his sharp eyes seemed to hold a flicker of something unreadable as he observed Maria. He raised a hand, a silent command that instantly halted the guards. "Antonio," Marco said, his voice calm, measured, cutting through the chaos, "I will handle this. Let us not make a further spectacle in front of our guests. This young woman is clearly distraught. Take her to the vestry. I will speak with her." Antonio hesitated, his eyes narrowed, but the authority in Marco's tone was undeniable. With a frustrated sigh and a final, menacing glare at Maria, he nodded to the guards. They led Maria away, not out of the church, but into a secluded room off to the side, the heavy wooden door closing behind them with a soft thud, muffling the lingering murmurs of the stunned congregation. Inside the small, sparsely furnished room, Maria found herself guarded by two large, silent men. Her heart still pounded, but a new wave of despair threatened to overwhelm her. Had she failed? Had her desperate act been in vain? No one had believed her. No one had listened. She had only succeeded in making a fool of herself, and now she was trapped. Moments later, the door opened again, and Antonio strode in, his face still contorted with fury. He dismissed the guards with a curt nod. "Now, Maria," he began, his voice dangerously low, "explain yourself. What is this madness? Have you lost your mind? To disrespect my father's memory like this, at his own funeral?" He paced before her, his hands clasped behind his back, his anger barely contained. "What did you hope to achieve? Sympathy? Attention? My father is dead. Accept it." Maria, though intimidated, stood her ground. "He's not dead, Antonio," she insisted, her voice gaining strength despite her fear. "My mother, Isabella, she saw things, she heard things, the changing medicines, your whispered conversations with Dr. Giovanni. Don Rossi knew he was being poisoned. He left clues, a diary. He faked his death to expose the traitors." She poured out the story, the words tumbling over each other in her desperate haste to make him understand, to make him see the truth. Antonio listened, his expression shifting from anger to a chilling disbelief, then to outright scorn. He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "A diary? Clues? Maria, you've been reading too many cheap novels. My father was old, sick. He died of natural causes. Your mother is an old woman prone to foolish superstitions. And you're just a hysterical girl. You've disgraced yourself and your mother." He shook his head, a dismissive wave of his hand. "This is madness. Pure, unadulterated madness." He turned to leave, clearly believing the matter settled. determined to resume the funeral as if her outburst had been nothing more than a momentary, regrettable lapse in decorum. But before he could reach the door, it opened again, and Marco Falcone stepped in. His eyes, dark and penetrating, swept over them both. Antonio stopped, his posture stiffening. "I told you I would handle her, Antonio," Marco said, his voice quiet but firm. "Return to the congregation. We must maintain an appearance of order. I will ensure she understands the gravity of her actions." Antonio, though clearly irritated by Marco's intervention, knew better than to argue. Marco's authority, though subtle, was absolute. He shot Maria one last contemptuous look and exited the room, leaving her alone with the consigliere. Marco turned to Maria, his gaze unwavering. The room was silent save for the distant murmur of the crowd in the church. "Tell me everything, Maria," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, yet infused with an intensity that demanded her full attention. "From the beginning, do not leave out a single detail." Maria, still wary, still unsure of who to trust, hesitated. She had just been dismissed as mad by Antonio, her words treated with scorn. Could Marco be any different? But there was something in his eyes, a depth of understanding, a quiet invitation to confide that was different from Antonio's dismissive anger, and she was desperate. She had no other options. Taking a deep breath, she began. She recounted Isabella's observations, the suspicious changes in Don Rossi's medication, the hushed conversations between Antonio and Dr. Giovanni, the sudden, inexplicable declines in Don Rossi's health. She spoke of the hidden compartment, the worn leather diary, and the painstaking hours she and her mother had spent deciphering its coded entries. She revealed Don Rossi's plan to fake his own death, his chilling realization that he was being poisoned, and his desperate strategy to expose his betrayers. She repeated his cryptic message to Isabella, "The viper will shed his skin." As Maria spoke, Marco listened intently, his expression unreadable. He did not interrupt, did not scoff, did not dismiss her words as madness. Occasionally he would nod almost imperceptibly, a subtle gesture that sent a jolt of hope through Maria. When she finished, a heavy silence descended upon the room. Finally Marco spoke, his voice still low, but now with a profound resonance. "Don Rossi," he began, his gaze fixed on Maria, "was a man who prepared for every eventuality. He had a contingency plan for everything, Maria, everything, including his own death." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I also had my suspicions, Maria. For months I have been investigating discreetly, following threads, observing the movements of certain individuals." He then delivered the most astonishing revelation of all. Don Rossi, Marco continued, had a trusted, secret contact, someone he relied upon to execute his final plan should his life be threatened and his initial attempts at exposure fail. He stepped closer to Maria, his eyes locking with hers. "I was that contact, Maria. Don Rossi foresaw this moment. He instructed me to watch for a specific signal at his funeral, a signal that would indicate his plan was compromised or that the wrong people were trying to take control." A tremor ran through Maria. "The signal?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marco's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile, a grim, knowing expression. "Your outburst, Maria, your brave, desperate declaration that he was not dead. That was the signal. It activated the next phase of Don Rossi's plan. A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled her knees, washed over Maria. She hadn't failed. She had succeeded. Don Rossi was alive, and Marco, the stoic consigliere, was his ally. "Don Rossi is indeed alive," Marco confirmed, his voice now imbued with a quiet authority. "He is in hiding, waiting for this moment. Your courage, Maria, has triggered his return." He then turned to the door, his demeanor shifting, becoming more resolute. He subtly communicated with the two guards outside, their faces impassive as they received his hushed instructions. Maria watched as Marco's loyalists within the church, a few discreet figures scattered among the mourners, began to move, their actions subtle but purposeful. The funeral, Marco announced to the remaining congregation, would be paused, supposedly due to the unfortunate disruption. But Maria knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the pause was not for mourning, but for the trap to be sprung. The game had truly begun. Marco, ever the master of deception, re-entered the main sanctuary of the church, his face a mask of practiced solemnity. He announced to the bewildered congregation that due to the unfortunate incident, and the need for the family to compose themselves, the funeral proceedings would be temporarily halted. He further stated that a private family meeting would be held immediately to address the situation and discuss how to proceed. His voice, calm and authoritative, quelled the remaining whispers and murmurs, restoring a semblance of order amidst the underlying chaos. Antonio, still seething from Maria's outburst and Marco's intervention, followed Marco's instructions, albeit reluctantly. He, along with Dr. Giovanni and a few other key figures loyal to Antonio's faction, were ushered towards a secure, opulent room within the church's ancient walls, a room often used for private family discussions or sensitive negotiations. Unbeknownst to them, Maria and Marco were already waiting inside, hidden from view, observing through a cleverly concealed peephole. As Antonio, Dr. Giovanni, and their small entourage stepped into the room, a heavy, ornate door swung shut behind them with an ominous thud, the metallic click of a lock echoing loudly in the sudden silence. The room, richly decorated but now feeling like a cage, was suddenly sealed. Antonio, initially annoyed by the confinement, began to express his displeasure, but his words died in his throat as a new sound filled the air. A hidden speaker, seamlessly integrated into the intricate woodwork of the room, crackled to life. The sudden, unexpected noise sent a jolt of alarm through Antonio and his companions. Then, a voice, deep and gravelly, yet unmistakably familiar, resonated through the room. It was a voice that had commanded fear and respect for decades, a voice they had all believed to be silenced forever. "Antonio Giovanni," the voice began, each word dripping with cold fury. "Did you truly think you could outsmart the Viper?" The blood drained from Antonio's face, leaving him ashen. Dr. Giovanni stumbled backward, his hand flying to his mouth to stifle a terrified gasp. Their eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the voice, their expressions a mixture of terror and utter disbelief. It was impossible. He was dead. They had seen the body. They had orchestrated his demise. Yet, the voice was unmistakable. Then, with a soft whirring sound, a section of the wall slid silently open, revealing a hidden compartment. From the shadows within emerged Don Vincenzo Rossi himself. He was thinner than they remembered, his face etched with the recent ordeal, but his eyes, those legendary, piercing eyes, burned with a cold, vengeful fire. He looked frail, yes, but undeniably alive and radiating an aura of dangerous power that instantly filled the room. Antonio and Dr. Giovanni were utterly stunned, paralyzed by shock. Their faces were drained of all color, their mouths agape, stammering incoherent sounds that died in their throats. They looked like ghosts themselves, confronted by the very specter they thought they had laid to rest. The reality hit them with the force of a physical blow. Their carefully constructed lie, their audacious betrayal, had crumbled in an instant. Don Rossi surveyed them, a grim satisfaction playing on his lips. "You look surprised," he stated, his voice now stronger, more resonant. "Did you truly believe me so easily fooled? So easily dispatched?" He slowly walked towards them, each step deliberate, menacing. He then began to unravel the intricate web of their treachery. "Antonio," he began, his gaze fixing on his son, "your greed was always your weakness. You sought to seize control, to usurp my position, blinded by ambition." He then turned his chilling gaze to Dr. Giovanni. "And you, doctor, a man of medicine, sworn to heal, yet you chose to become an instrument of death. Your complicity in slowly poisoning me, a slow, agonizing decline, orchestrated by those who promised Antonio control, the Moretti family." He explained how he had suspected their betrayal for months, noticing the subtle changes in his medication, the increasingly frequent checkups that left him weaker, not stronger. He revealed how he had used a rare, almost undetectable drug that mimicked death, plunging him into a deep, death-like coma for a precise duration. It was a gamble, a dangerous play, but one he had meticulously planned. He detailed how Isabella's careful observations, her unwavering loyalty, and Maria's incredible courage had been the crucial elements that activated his backup plan. Isabella, his trusted housekeeper, had been his eyes and ears, confirming his suspicions without even realizing it until Maria pieced it all together. He pointed out the specific clues he had intentionally left for Isabella to find, the subtle discrepancies in his medical records, the cryptic notes hidden within the diary, even the particular antique key he had left in an unusual place. knowing her meticulous nature would eventually lead her to the hidden compartment. I knew, Don Rossi stated, his voice heavy with a mix of fury and a profound sadness, that Isabella was the only one I could truly trust, the only one who would see the truth even if she didn't understand it at first. He then began to present irrefutable evidence, pulling out a small encrypted device from his pocket. "Let us not rely solely on words," he said, his eyes gleaming with cold triumph. He played recordings of Antonio and Dr. Giovanni discussing their plot, their voices clear and incriminating, detailing their plans to eliminate Don Rossi and seize control. He displayed financial transactions meticulously documented, showing large sums of money transferred from Moretti accounts to offshore accounts controlled by Antonio and Dr. Giovanni. There were other incriminating documents, forged signatures, and detailed plans for restructuring the organization post Don Rossi's death. And the Moretti family, Don Rossi added, a dark chuckle escaping his lips, was merely a convenient smokescreen, a distraction. While Antonio believed he was dealing with rivals, he was merely a pawn in a much larger game, a game orchestrated by someone even closer, someone far more cunning, far more dangerous. As Don Rossi spoke, other loyalists, brought in by Marco, entered the room. They were men of imposing stature, their faces grim, their movements precise. They moved swiftly, securing Antonio and Dr. Giovanni, their protests dying in their throats as they were firmly restrained. The game was over. The traitors were caught. Meanwhile, in the main sanctuary of the church, Marco Falcone, ever the composed consigliere, smoothly informed the remaining mourners that there had been a misunderstanding regarding the funeral arrangements and that the service was now postponed indefinitely. He offered vague apologies for the disruption, hinting at unforeseen family matters that required immediate attention. Panic and confusion, though somewhat contained by Marco's authoritative presence, began to spread through the congregation. Whispers turned into hurried conversations, and the air crackled with unease. The funeral for Don Vincenzo Rossi had indeed been a spectacle, but not in the way anyone had anticipated. Don Rossi, now firmly back in control, settled into the familiar leather armchair in his private study, the room still smelling faintly of old books and cigar smoke. Marco stood silently by his side, a pillar of unwavering loyalty. Across from him, Maria and Isabella sat, their faces a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and a lingering sense of disbelief at the whirlwind events of the day. The immediate threat had been neutralized, Antonio and Dr. Giovanni secured, but the deeper wounds, the profound betrayal, still festered. Antonio was always predictable, Don Rossi began, his voice devoid of the earlier fury, now tinged with a weary resignation. His ambition was a blunt instrument, easily wielded by others. He believed himself a king, but he was merely a pawn, moved by a hand far more subtle and cunning. He paused, his gaze drifting to a framed photograph on his desk, a younger Antonio and Sophia smiling brightly. A flicker of pain crossed his eyes before hardening again. "The true mastermind," he continued, his voice dropping to a low, chilling tone that commanded absolute attention, "was not Antonio. It was Sophia." A collective gasp escaped Maria and Isabella. Sophia, Don Rossi's daughter. The charming, intelligent, outwardly devoted Sophia. It was unthinkable. Maria remembered playing with Sophia as a child, Sophia always gracious, always seemingly kind. Isabella had always spoken of Sophia with a certain fondness, admiring her poise and sharp mind. Don Rossi watched their reactions, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. "You are surprised," he observed, as many were. Sophia cultivated an image of delicate refinement, a woman above the crude dealings of our world, but beneath that veneer lay a ruthless ambition that far surpassed Antonio's. He explained how Sophia, always resentful of her father's iron grip and the traditional expectation that Antonio, as the eldest son, would inherit the reins of power, had secretly harbored a deep-seated desire for control. She wanted to be the power behind the throne, or better yet, on the throne herself. "She manipulated Antonio," Don Rossi continued, his voice heavy with the weight of this revelation, "played on his insecurities, his desire for my approval, and his greed. She fed him the idea that my time was over, that he was the rightful heir, and that a swift, decisive action was necessary to secure his position before I became too frail to be removed. He recounted how Sofia had cleverly used Dr. Giovanni's financial difficulties and his own hidden resentments against Don Rossi to enlist him in the plot, promising him a substantial share of the reorganized empire and protection from past indiscretions. Don Rossi described how Sofia had cultivated a secret alliance with the Morettis, not as simple rivals, but as willing collaborators in her scheme. She had convinced them that by eliminating Don Rossi and installing Antonio as a puppet leader, she could then easily maneuver to take over the entire organization, consolidating power and expanding their collective influence. She was playing a long game, a game of chess where everyone else was merely a piece to be sacrificed. She was far more cunning than Antonio, Don Rossi admitted, a grudging respect in his tone despite the betrayal. Antonio was loud, impulsive. Sofia was quiet, observant. She moved in the shadows, planting seeds of discontent, whispering suggestions, twisting truths until they became palatable lies. He revealed how he had slowly, painstakingly, uncovered Sofia's subtle manipulations, her clandestine meetings, her coded communications. He had found encrypted messages on a burner phone she thought was secure, tracking her movements and conversations through his own network of informants. She had been so confident in her cleverness, so certain she was smarter than everyone, especially her aging father. Suddenly, the study door opened and two of Marco's men escorted Sofia into the room. She walked in with a defiant air, her head held high. Though her face was noticeably pale, her usual poise slightly fractured. She saw her father, alive and very much in charge, and her eyes widened fractionally, a flicker of raw fear momentarily eclipsing her carefully constructed composure. She looked at Maria and Isabella, her expression a mix of contempt and bewildered fury. Don Rossi rose from his chair, his presence filling the room. "Sofia," he said, his voice devoid of paternal warmth, "it seems your grand designs have come undone." He laid bare her betrayal, detailing every step of her intricate plot, every manipulation, every lie. He spoke of her ambition, her cold calculation, and the shocking depth of her deception. He held up the burner phone, displaying the damning messages, the financial transfers, the detailed plans for his demise. Sofia, cornered and exposed, initially tried to deny it, her voice trembling with feigned indignation. "Father, this is preposterous. Antonio must have implicated me. He is a coward and a fool." But as Don Rossi continued, presenting irrefutable evidence, her facade began to crumble. Her denials grew weaker, her eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Finally, with a guttural cry, she broke down, tears streaming down her face, but not tears of remorse, rather of frustrated rage. "You never trusted me," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the study walls. "You always favored Antonio, the weakling. You ruled with an iron fist, never allowing any of us to truly flourish. I deserved more. I am smarter, more capable than Antonio, than all of you. I would have built an empire greater than yours, father, an empire you could only dream of." She admitted to everything, her confession a torrent of resentment and self-justification, believing, even in her defeat, that her ambition was righteous, that she was merely taking what was rightfully hers. The aftermath for the Rossi family was shattering. Don Rossi, despite his triumph, was a deeply wounded man. The betrayal by his own children, the very blood he had sought to protect and provide for, cut deeper than any rival's knife. Antonio and Sofia, his flesh and blood, were disowned, stripped of their names and their inheritance. Their fate, within the strict, unforgiving code of the family, was sealed. They would face consequences far more severe than any legal system could impose, disappearing into the shadows from which they tried to emerge. Dr. Giovanni, his medical license revoked, faced legal prosecution for his role in the conspiracy and for medical malpractice, his reputation and freedom irrevocably lost. Don Rossi turned to Isabella and Maria, his face softened by a profound gratitude. "Isabella," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "your unwavering loyalty, your quiet observation saved my life. You are the truest of my family." To Maria, he added, "And Maria, your courage, your fierce determination to speak the truth when all others would have faltered, activated the plan. You risked everything. You have shown a bravery that few possess." He expressed his sincerest apologies for the danger they had been put in and offered them protection and a secure future. a life beyond anything they could have ever imagined or hoped for. He vowed that they would never want for anything again, that their loyalty would be repaid 1,000-fold. The old Don Rossi, the ruthless viper, was still present, but the betrayal had changed him, leaving a scar that would never fully heal, but also opening his eyes to the true meaning of loyalty and family, found not in blood, but in unwavering trust and courage. Months melted into seasons, and the once turbulent waters of the Rossi family gradually found a new, albeit altered, equilibrium. Don Rossi, having officially returned to the world, was a changed man. The public narrative spun by Marco Falcone was masterful. A severe, life-threatening illness, a miraculous recovery, and a renewed vigor for his legitimate business ventures. The old ways of the organization, while still present in the undercurrents of Palermo, began to shift. Don Rossi, having learned a bitter lesson about blind trust and unchecked ambition within his own bloodline, sought to dismantle the most corrupt elements of his empire, replacing them with a new structure built on loyalty and merit rather than familial ties alone. He brought in fresh blood, individuals loyal to him and Marco, who understood the evolving landscape and shared his vision of a more streamlined, less overtly violent, and increasingly legitimate enterprise. Isabella, her years of quiet, dedicated service culminating in such dramatic fashion, finally retired. Don Rossi, true to his word, ensured her comfort and peace for the remainder of her days. She moved into a charming villa nestled in the hills overlooking Palermo, a world away from the shadows of the Rossi estate. Her days were now filled with the gentle rhythm of tending her vibrant garden, her hands, once busy with the meticulous care of a powerful man's home, now nurturing delicate roses and fragrant herbs. The constant fear that had been her silent companion for decades slowly receded, replaced by a profound sense of tranquility and the quiet joy of a life well lived, finally free. Maria, however, found herself at a crossroads. Her act of courage had not only saved Don Rossi, but had also thrust her into a world she had actively sought to escape. Don Rossi, recognizing her sharp intellect, her unwavering moral compass, and her remarkable bravery, offered her a unique position within his burgeoning legitimate businesses. It was not a return to the shadowy world of the Mafia, but an opportunity to apply her legal knowledge and keen analytical skills in a substantial, impactful way. Initially, Maria hesitated. Her life had been carefully constructed to distance herself from this very world. She had studied law to uphold justice, not to navigate the complex, often morally ambiguous, landscape of a reformed crime boss. Yet, the offer was compelling. Don Rossi wasn't asking her to become like him, but to use her talents to shape the future of his legitimate empire, to bring a new perspective, a different kind of strength. She saw it as a chance to influence change from within, to infuse a degree of ethics and transparency into an organization that desperately needed it. It was a daunting prospect, but one that resonated with her deep-seated desire to make a difference. After much deliberation, and with Isabella's quiet encouragement, Maria accepted. Her role quickly evolved beyond mere legal counsel. Dum-dum. Rossi, scarred by his children's betrayal, found in Maria a unique confidant and advisor. Their relationship blossomed into something akin to a father-daughter bond, forged not by blood, but by extraordinary circumstances, mutual respect, and an undeniable trust. Maria became his voice of reason, his moral compass, a fresh perspective in a world often blinded by tradition and power. She challenged him, not with defiance, but with logic and a steadfast commitment to what was right, pushing him towards more ethical and sustainable business practices. She helped him navigate complex legal frameworks, restructure corporate entities, and build a new, more legitimate legacy. Under Maria's influence, the Rossi organization began to shed its notorious past. Investments shifted towards legitimate enterprises, renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and technological innovation. The old guard, those who resisted change, were quietly and efficiently phased out. Don Rossi, guided by Maria's insights and Marco's strategic execution, was not just building a business empire, he was, in his own way, building a new kind of power, one that sought to integrate, rather than merely dominate, the economic landscape of Sicily. Maria, once the maid's daughter, now walked through the bustling streets of Palermo with a newfound confidence. She was no longer just Maria, Isabella's intelligent daughter. She was a respected figure, a key player in the transformation of one of Sicily's most powerful families. Her journey, from a terrified young woman shouting a desperate truth in a church to a trusted advisor shaping the future, was a testament to her resilience and intellect. She became a quiet legend in her own right, her story whispered in hushed tones, a beacon of courage in a city that had witnessed centuries of shadows. The tale of Don Vincenzo Rossi's funeral served as a powerful, enduring lesson to all who heard it. It underscored the profound truth that even in the darkest corners of human endeavor, amidst betrayal and deceit, courage and unwavering loyalty could pierce through the deepest deceptions, bringing light and ultimately reshaping destinies. Maria's act had not just saved a man, it had set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the fabric of power in Palermo, proving that the quiet strength of a maid's daughter could indeed move mountains. The city, once defined by its ancient codes and hidden machinations, was slowly, irrevocably changing, one courageous truth at a time.